Extra special thanks to Cincy Music for co-hosting My Favorite Album is Terrible. For the best in what Cincinnati's amazing local music scene has to offer, be sure to follow them on Instagram at Cincy Music, that's Cincy with a Y, on Facebook at cincymusic.com, also Cincy with a Y, and on their official website, www.cincymusic.com. Here's the show.
Good evening. I'm Kent Mulcahy with the Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library. Welcome to another episode of My Favorite Album is Terrible, the music show where we discuss misunderstood, unloved, or overlooked albums. Now, as I say every week, everything that we talk about tonight is going to be freely available to you with your Cincinnati and Hamilton County Public Library card, be it music, books, movies, anything. Check the comments and I will put direct links to all of that stuff. Now, the album that we're going to be talking about tonight is available through our Freegal streaming music services. Freegal is a service where you download songs and they are yours to keep. You can also download music videos from that. We also have Hoopla, which is a streaming service. Make sure you check those out. As I always say, I don't pay for any streaming music services because between Freegal and Hoopla, we've got you covered. Now, speaking of checking the comments section, if you have thoughts on tonight's album or if you think there's an album we should discuss in the future, please jump in and let us know. I'm going to be there chatting with everyone. And if you enjoy what you're seeing tonight, please give us a like and give us a share. I've really appreciated folks sharing this with folks and helping us get the word out and bringing more people in every week. So if you feel so inclined, please do so. It's greatly appreciated. I'm very excited to announce that our guest tonight is local artist and animator Mark Neeley. You might have seen some of Mark's work, around Cincinnati with local organizations like the Mini Micro Cinema or Thunder Sky. But he is also a contributor to the highly influential music website Aquarium Drunkard. He does reviews for Aquarium Drunkard. His choices for reviews are fantastic gems that you probably would not have found otherwise. His writing style is great. Make sure you check that out. But he also animates a wonderful series for Aquarium Drunkard called Aquarium Drunkard Picture Show. How would I describe it? I think the best way I would describe that is that it's a visual mixtape, really cool song selections bleeding into each other with, really great animations that he does. And I can't recommend that enough. I will put links to a couple of those in the comments section. Aquarium Drunkard Picture Show debuted in 2020, and its first episode aired on Adult Swim, which is just so cool. He has a short animated film making the rounds on the film festival circuit right now called Fragments. It's wonderful. I can't recommend that enough. I will definitely be asking him about that, so make sure you check that out. Now, what album did Mark want to talk about tonight? He wanted to talk about the Byrds' 1968 album, The Notorious Byrd Brothers. The Byrds are just a highly influential, 60s rock band in the psychedelic rock or folk rock scene. If you're not terribly familiar with the Byrds, you've probably heard their song Turn, 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 or you know that the highly opinionated David Crosby got his start in the Byrds. He went on, of course, to be in Crosby, Stills, and Nash and successful solo career. Aside from those tidbits, a lot of folks know or think of the Byrds as that band that played songs Bob Dylan wrote. Part of the reason why Mark wanted to talk about them, he kind of wants to dispel that myth or that line of thinking. But the real reason Mark wanted to talk about this album, I love how we're getting creative with the whole idea of My Favorite Album is Terrible. When I started this, I was thinking, let's talk about albums that most people and critics hate and talk to someone who loves them. And we still do a lot of that. But tonight's album, of all the albums we've talked about so far, the Notorious Byrd Brothers, I would say it's by far the most universally, loved, critically acclaimed album that we've chatted about. You're going to be hard pressed to find bad reviews of this album. So why in the world did Mark want to talk about this one? He has some interesting thoughts on the idea of, from this era of music when it dropped in 1968, were people really giving full albums the attention that they deserve? This was the era, big singles, radio play, definitely dominated the musical landscape. So, well reviewed as it was, people say they, love the Byrds, they love this album. How much listening did they really give the deeper cuts? And so Mark had some thoughts on that. We're going to talk about, the album experience through the ages, starting with the 60s. Where are we now in 2021 with the world of streaming music? So, where does the full album experience fit in with there. Now, admittedly, I am not a connoisseur of folk rock, or I guess really classic rock in general, as terrible as that is to say. But when I was, a kid getting into music, all of the bands that I just loved at the time, you cited the Byrds as an influence. Specifically, one that comes to mind is REM, and their guitarist, Peter Buck, really talked about the Byrds a lot. And so as a kid, I was like, reading interviews with Peter Buck and like, oh, I'm gonna go back and listen to the Byrds. And I just never did. So I was very excited when Mark picked the Byrds as the album he wanted to talk about, to kind of force my hand to finally dive in and listen to him, to learn a little bit more about what exactly it was that influenced the artists that I love. So that's what we're going to talk about. Before we bring Mark on, let's take a look at a clip from Fragments, the film that I was talking about earlier. We're going to watch a short clip from that, and then we'll bring Mark on. All right. Hello, Mark Neeley. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Happy to be here. I think it's going to be fun.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. And I appreciate you reaching out to me to do this. I was really honored that you reached out and you have a good album pick. But before we get to that, we just watched a clip from Fragments. So I guess just in general, what do you want to tell folks about Fragments? They saw 30 seconds of it. What do you want to tell them before they go and dive into the rest of it?
Well, Fragments was a short film that I made. It was based on a trip that I took out to California a couple summers back. It combines animation with some 35 millimeter film slides that we shot out there. Excuse me. And then the film came out right before the pandemic hit, which was odd timing. But in a certain way, I feel like it worked out. I've been really happy with some of the feedback that people have said it provided a comfort to them in some way. It's a very personal film.
Yeah.
It's been on the film festival circuit now for a little while. I think that's kind of winding down. But really grateful. It's got into some good festivals. And it's probably what I'm most proud of, I would say.
Yeah.
Really happy with the way it came out.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And, there's a lot of, like you said, it's very personal. So, I'm sure there's a lot of, background stuff about it that, not everyone's going to pick up initially. But the one thing that, we talked about this a little bit before we were recording, that personally to me, the aspect of the pet and, the pet being sick and, as a, I've got a couple of old dogs and, you got that coming for you. So that really, really spoke to me. I thought that was really beautifully done.
Thank you. And I think I was kind of so focused on telling my own story that I knew it was going to be sad when people watched it. But I don't think it was really conscious to me that so many people would relate it to their own experiences with pets or maybe something else in their life. So,
that must have been great to hear, people relating it to their own experiences. That's fantastic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That's got to be rewarding. So where can folks go to check out the full version of Fragments?
Probably the easiest place is my website, which is just markneeley.com. And click on the animation link on the left, and it'll be the first thing that pops up there.
Yeah, and I'll put a direct link to that in the comments. So everyone who's watching, after this wraps up, head right over there and make sure you check out Fragments. So moving on to, as I mentioned in the intro, you are a contributor to Aquarium Drunkard, a fantastic music website, very influential. Before we get into what you do for it, how did you fall into that gig?
Yeah, so I had done a little bit of work for Aquarium Drunkard on the artistic side. And then actually when Fragments came out, they were kind enough to do an article about it. Yeah. And also talk about the soundtrack, which I should mention. by a friend of mine named Yohei Shikano. I really think his soundtrack really elevated the film.
It's great.
I don't think it would work without it. And after that, we sort of developed a working relationship. And Justin, who runs Aquarium Drunkard, sort of asked me if I would partner with him to do this visual program called the Aquarium Drunkard Picture Show.
Right.
Which is sort of an old, like 120 minutes, if anyone remembers that.
Yeah.
Almost like a cable access style show that combines musical footage and my own animation, and all sorts of stuff. And actually, the first episode of that appeared on the Adult Swim simulcast.
Yeah.
That was April of it was last, two Aprils ago now, which was really surreal. And so we've kept making them since. They've been online, and I also do some writing for Aquarium Drunkard as well. So I occasionally write pieces on both new and older albums. And,
Great. To back up for a second, though, you talked about the soundtrack to Fragments. Did you? Are you a musician yourselves? Do you play music?
I'm not. I dabbled on a very amateur level growing up, but I don't really consider myself one.
So did you go back and forth with the composer, or was it just, here it is, put what you want over it? Did you kind of...
It was mostly the latter. There
Okay.
was some, or we talked about some general direction, but basically Yohei, the musician, and he also lives out in LA, so it kind of gave it a real local flavor because the film was based out there. Really, once I heard his music, we sort of developed a friendship, and I just honed in on him to do the soundtrack because I knew he would do a great job.
Yeah.
We threw around a couple reference points, like we're both huge, like Brian Wilson, Beach Boys freaks, and so that was like a really big influence on this. That whole kind of '60s West Coast LA sound was a big influence, and but really I just trusted him, and as soon as he finished it, I thought it was perfect.
Yeah, but completely works. I thought the music was great. I ended up like going back and rewatch. Like I watched it once, and then I was like, okay, this time I'm going to go back and just kind of focus on the music for the second listen.
Yeah, I think the music for a lot of people, it's one of their biggest takeaways, and we designed it that way, so
yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I did forget to mention in the intro, you did used to work for the library in our virtual information center. So
I did, yeah.
Alumni.
Memories, and consider myself a big library advocate ever since. So
we appreciate it. Yeah, you made it easier for me when we were talking about what books and music and stuff that we were going to talk about for tonight's episode. You were like, no, I'll make sure you have it in the catalog. I'll do all that work for you. So, yeah.
I'm always in the catalog, so.
Great. That's what we like to do.
Picking up holds about once a week. So.
Well, speaking of our catalog, in our catalog, you can search for the Byrds, the Notorious Byrd Brothers, which is the album that you picked for us. So before we get into this one, let's just kind of start at the beginning. What was your introduction to the Byrds?
So got the album here.
There it is, on vinyl.
Trying to think when I very first discovered the Byrds. So when I was growing up, I'm in my early 30s now, and I grew up in kind of the latter stages of the kind of alternative rock movement, I guess you could say. After and then when I was in my mid to late teens. Through my early 20s, obviously, the indie rock movement was gaining all this momentum, and I was really into all that. It was an exciting time to be discovering new music. But, I started collecting records when I was about 16, so I got involved pretty early, and this was kind of before the big resurgence of vinyl, so you could really still go to places around town and pick up records super cheap, and lots of great stuff out there. And I was really into discovering new music, like a lot of people were at that time. But from an early age, I was always going backwards too, for whatever reason. So I would always go back to these sort of older reference points when I would dig for records. And the Byrds, yeah, there were a couple artists like this, the King, T-Rex, a lot of these older artists. But something about the Byrds sounds just immediately appealed to me. That sort of 12-string electric folk rock sound. And
12-string Rickenbacker.
That's right.
Rickenbacker guitar. Yeah.
Yes, classic. And, I think like a lot of folks, I had sort of a myopic view of the Byrds in my head. I think everyone sort of identifies them with their couple big hits, like Mr. Tambourine Man, which is, of course, a Dylan cover, and Turn, Turn, Turn. And, but I think what gets lost in the shuffle there is they had like a really incredible run of albums in the mid-'60s through the early '70s. And a lot of people don't realize, like the Beatles have said, like they were borrowing from the Byrds. So, they were really massively influential, but it never, I don't think the media ever kind of picked up on that. And the Notorious Byrd Brothers was just the one that I think where it all came together for them. I think it just has all of the best elements of their sound. Mm-hmm. It's late '60s, so it's got a lot of psychedelic sort of production. There's a lot of
does it ever. So many spots.
We'll talk about it, but it was, utilizing the Moog synthesizer when not a lot of music was. Mm-hmm. But it also still has the kind of classic early elements of what makes that kind of magic Byrd sound. And the Byrds have, ever since, they've been an all-time favorite, and just influential is just an understatement, I think.
It is. Yeah.
Love them, and I think their legacy, I think, is so misunderstood because the ripple effects of all the musicians and what they all went on to do. So you're talking Gene Clark, the Flying Burrito Brothers, Dillard and Clark, and Graham Parsons, and and I think they're just a really fun band to sort of, kind of like the Dead in a way. Their whole history is just kind of fun. Like, I don't know, sort of communicate with it and just dig into the old stories and everything.
Well, I want to get to the bigger point. Like when we were talking about just recording this episode, and I already hinted at it in the introduction, we're going to talk about the whole album experience and what gets lost. But, I do want to talk about some specific points of the album. So are there any absolute highlights? Like if someone hasn't heard anything from this album, maybe they've heard Turn, 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 maybe they've heard them do Tambourine Man. On this record specifically, the Notorious Byrd Brothers, what's the first song you would tell someone, go in, listen to this song?
I would probably say, I think I would probably choose Wasn't Born to Follow.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Because it's a wonderful song. I wouldn't say it's even my top favorite on the album personally, but I think it's maybe just the most accessible because there weren't really any singles on this album.
It doesn't sound like there are any singles to me, and I don't mean that as an insult. Like, that's not a backhanded insult at all. Like, but there are no like obvious choices, and I think it's funny that you picked Wasn't Born to Follow because yes, most of the song when it starts, you're like, oh, that's a sweet little guitar line there, great guitar interplay, but then there's that you talked about the psychedelic influence. It has the section that comes in every now and then, just out of nowhere. Okay, here's kind of we're going to change the tempo, do stuff with stereo effects. Here comes your Moog synthesizer, and it just explodes around you. And I don't know, that was an interesting choice on that song for me.
Yeah, it's a great song. It's got those really great Byrds harmonies too in the vocal. And that song, even though there weren't really any singles on here, that might be the one that might be the most familiar because that one was on the soundtrack to Easy Rider.
Oh yeah, okay.
Classic counterculture film. And actually, an Easy Rider, Dennis Hopper and Peter Fonda, if people didn't know, their whole characters were based on David Crosby and Roger McGuinn from the Byrds.
Oh. Yeah.
Kind of a little known fact, but if you know what those guys look like, you can see it. Especially Dennis Hopper, he looks just like David Crosby. So.
Well, again, staying on Wasn't Born to Follow for a second, I had notes about this one anyway, and I really want to, approach this carefully, because anytime you reference the movie Spinal Tap to a song that you're talking about and you like it, it's like, oh, it's going to come across like you're making fun of it or you're insulting it. And I don't feel that way about any of the stuff in Spinal Tap, because when they put those songs together, they were done with love and respect. They clearly cared about those genres. But in Spinal Tap, there's Listen to the Flower People. And there's that section right in the middle of it where it's just like, well, here's a sitar break, and it totally changes up. And when I got to that part in Wasn't Born to Follow, I was like, I didn't see it as being goofy. I was like, this is what Spinal Tap was respectfully referencing, exactly that kind of thing from this scene. So I don't know, that was one thing that jumped out to me. But
I get it, yeah. I agree,
but it works.
That,
it's good. I seriously don't mean that as an insult in any way. All right, so let's move on to the bigger topic that you brought up that I thought was fascinating. Very well reviewed album. You'd be hard pressed to find any music journalism disparaging this album. All your favorite jangle rock musicians go back to this, but you brought up the point of, maybe the full album experience might have gotten lost in the shuffle of singles of the time, and you want to kind of just spin off on that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this is something I think about a lot, because I love so much music of this period. I think a lot of people do, and I think sometimes it's just easy to forget that, in this period, mid to late 60s, even to the early 70s, the way people heard music so much was the radio.
Right.
That was the primary outlet. So you kind of heard what was on the charts, and then you don't even know if the record stores around you would have the album you wanted. It's funny, I actually, in 2019, I actually did a project with the library about this old underground newspaper called the Independent Eye that was published out of Cincinnati. We had a program at the main library, which was of this era.
Yeah.
And something I just went to thinking about this is that there would be all these old ads in the newspaper for local record stores, and they would say things like, "We're the only shop that sells British records, imports." And it was just interesting to me to think of that even when buying records was the industry, it was you just didn't have access, obviously, to things like you do now. And so I think so many artists were overshadowed by the Beatles and the Stones and Dylan, that people would hear the Byrds singles, and I also think bands like the Kinks, even the Beach Boys, after Pet Sounds, fall into this category too. And a lot of people just didn't realize how great the actual albums were, and how consistent they were. And I think there's a couple more Byrds albums. This one, Younger Than Yesterday, incredible album. That's probably my second favorite. And then Fifth Dimension. I think these are all brilliant records. This one has 8 Miles High, which is maybe their most well-known single after Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. But yeah, and I think a lot of people in my shoes experience this when they go back and rediscover all these artists now that they're being reissued and they're more appreciated on the internet and stuff. Is you listen to these records front to back, and it just changes your whole perception.
I wish I could go back in time. Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, just real quick. I think a lot of people on the populist level, like we're talking about, if you just ask someone, "Oh, what do you think of the Byrds?" I think the average person is going to say what we said. They know the singles. They were also sort of made out to be like an American Beatles by the press.
Right. Yeah.
Was, I mean, there was some lineage there, but it's really pretty inaccurate.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, I wish I could go back in time and talk to people like as these albums were coming out. Because I remember when I was a kid, I'm a little older than you, so like when I was a kid, it was all grunge all the time. And so you'd go and you picked up Nirvana Nevermind, Nirvana In Utero, and by that time the exciting thing was to talk about, oh, here's I think the best song on In Utero is Scentless Apprentice. Heart-Shaped Box that's the one they play on the radio. And I want to know I wish I knew how those discussions went when these full albums came out, because I think of, when I think of this time in music, I have visuals of like those 45s, the singles and the stuff. And I think exponentially over time, by the time we get to this stuff, we think of them as compilation bands, like the Nuggets compilation, box sets, the greatest hits of the 70s on the commercial. And I don't know. I'm like you. There are some real hidden gems in the artists themselves. These are not throwaway songs. So it just gets lost. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. And especially when it comes to like greatest hits compilations, because when the music industry and all these major labels or anything like that, it was just like a never-ending cycle. And some of these artists, they would I think of the Beach Boys specifically, to try to milk that for all it was worth. There's like dozens upon dozens of like official greatest hits packages under a million different names.
Mm-hmm.
And it's exactly what we're talking about. They were honing in on singles that people knew, and they would just try to basically resell them by packaging them in these compilations. And I do think that it's kind of an odd dichotomy, because this was the era of the record where you put it on the turntable, you flip it over, you were listening to the full record, but it was kind of also an era that the single was so important, and that's what people were looking for, that it's really strange. And I really think that so for so many artists, the full albums kind of got swept under the rug.
Yeah.
In favor of those greatest hits packages.
Okay, I could go on forever. I got to move up to the wrap up portion a little bit. You had recommended a couple of books, and the first one I'm going to throw at you, as I figure out the right way to put it, is Waiting for the Sun. So this obviously available at the library. What can you tell us about this book? Why did you pick this one?
That is easily one of my all-time favorite music books, and I've got a whole shelf full here. But so I picked this one. It's a great book on its own, but it's also talking about this period. So it's sort of a whole history of music in Los Angeles and the West Coast, specifically, the 50s through the 70s, when sort of these identifiable sounds started coming out of all these recording studios like Gold Star and Sunset Sounds, and it's just a treasure trove of it's narratively there's a timeline, but along the way there's all these just super entertaining anecdotes of stuff that would have only happened in the 60s in Los Angeles, just in terms of all the drama and everything. And but yeah, so the Byrds factor really heavily into it, because that was such a sound that came out of Los Angeles. And but it goes into all genres, including metal, even into like the 80s and 90s. Great book. Yeah.
All right. Well, the second one, and again, everybody check the comments section. I'm going to put links to all of these. So book 2, Jazz Anecdotes by Bill, let me get my fingers out of the way, Bill Crow.
Yes. This is, to me, it's just simply one of the best music books. It's a great one just to kind of pick up off the shelf, or, once you get it from the library. It's basically just this compilation that this author made of, as the title says, all of these really comedic jazz anecdotes from all these old touring musicians, all the way back from like the 40s. And it's just a really kind of unique perspective on what it was like for those musicians to be on the road in that era. And it's just, it's very insightful and hilarious at the same time.
Yeah, I think there's like a misconception if, as, people get further and further away from, the jazz era, like jazz is now, it's something that you go to music school to learn, and it's in the one club that you go to and you hire a jazz combo for your wedding or your office event. But, it's easy to forget, and, I'm not pretending I'm saying anything, revelatory here, but that was like the debauchery, the rock and roll of that era, and just like, fighting to make it. And yeah, some of those stories are just, like you say, hilarious, terrifying, all of those things.
Well, and just to tie it in once more, 8 Miles High by the Byrds was, in their own words, was very influenced by John Coltrane.
Oh.
They were big jazz fans, like listening to Coltrane on the road all the time.
Mm-hmm.
That song has a very specific jazz.
I hear it in in the Byrds drumming a lot. I hear a lot of that, jazz. All right, so yeah, could talk forever about this, but we're gonna have to wrap it up. Any last things you want to say about your own work, about the Byrds, a random recommendation you want to make that has something or nothing to do with what we've been talking about?
Well, yeah, I just hope that everyone listens to the record. Really think there's something in here for everybody.
I agree.
And yeah, you can check out my own work at that website, markneeley.com. I also animate music videos. I've done about 5 now. Mm-hmm. Actually had one come out about 2 weeks ago by a musician named Spencer Collum, who plays the pedal steel in Nashville. Yeah, I'd love for you to check that out. And, support your local libraries.
Thank you for that. Yeah, thanks for that plug. Yeah, support your local artists and libraries. Now's the time for that, especially as we're hopefully coming out of the pandemic. It's time to get back to all of this stuff. Well, thank you so much for your time. I had a lot of fun with this chat, and yeah, thanks a lot. Maybe we should do it again sometime about another album.
I'd love to. Yeah, thank you.
All right. Have a good night.
You too.
All right, thanks so much to Mark Neeley for giving us some of his time and for taking part in that great discussion with us tonight. Make sure you check out all of his work. It's fantastic. Again, check the links for that. But yeah, thanks a lot, Mark. And thank you so much for tuning in tonight. Again, if you liked what you were seeing, make sure you share it with some folks. Give us a like, share us around Facebook. We really, really appreciate that. Check the comments section where I will be revealing who we will be talking to 2 weeks from now on Thursday at 8 p.m. right here. And as always, thank you so much to Cincy Music for co-hosting these and helping us get these out there. Really excited about live music coming back. And so if you want to keep up on what's going on around Cincinnati, and especially local Cincinnati artists as they start making their returns to the stages, you have to give Cincy Music a follow. All right, thanks so much, and I will see you 2 Thursdays from now. Good night.